Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. This video is going to be about the things that you might want to think about before moving to Australia. These are just a few points that I jotted down that maybe you would like to take into consideration if you are moving to Australia, immigrating, or you just are curious about what Australia is really like. I did a quick Google search on this topic and I couldn't really find any in-depth points that would really show you what it would sort of be like to live in Australia. And so this video is there for those who are maybe thinking of immigrating to Australia and just kind of want to get a feel of what the negatives might be. These might not be negatives for you. They're not necessarily all negatives for me, but it might be something to consider. I am an Australian currently living in South Africa. I love Australia. It'll always be my home. And so I kind of want to put a little disclaimer out there to also say, I'm really sorry if this offends you in any way. It's not meant to be there to offend anybody. It's more just supposed to be educational. So I hope that this video is useful. Without further ado, let's get into the points. The first point that I want to get into is that Australia is quite an expensive country. I know that it is all relative in comparison to what you earn, but somebody coming, for instance, from South Africa and taking their rand with them to Australia, it's quite a large conversion and you don't really get that much out at the end of the day. Even as an Australian living in Australia, certain things are really pricey. For instance, renting is really expensive. Also, like going out for food is expensive. Going to do certain activities are really expensive. I know when we were there recently, we went to the aquarium and I think the entrance was something like $50 something per person, which is crazy. I think in rand that comes something down to almost like 600 rand a person, which is really expensive. So it is quite pricey to go and do things in Australia. However, a lot of activities are free, so we also need to keep that in mind. Point number 2 is that there is not really a lot of domestic help in the home. I'm not sure if you're aware, but in South Africa, it is quite common to have somebody come into the home a few days a week. Some people even have every day of the week to come and help with the domestic work. So, you know, clean floors, do dishes, do washing, make the beds, anything you sort of need. It's also quite common if you have children to have like a nanny. Some households even have a cleaning person and a nanny and a gardener. So there's really a lot of help here. And I guess it's a good form of job creation as well, because although the job is really hard, it takes a lot of work to keep a house clean, you don't need to have an education for it. So I think it's a good thing in that sense because we can both help each other out. We have a cleaning lady that comes 3 days a week and it is honestly a lifesaver. She is such an amazing person. She comes and helps us in the home, and I must say it takes a lot off of our plate. Whereas I know that when we were in Australia, you have to worry a lot more about the domestic work. It's quite a stress. You spend your weekends cleaning, after work cleaning. You probably don't clean as much maybe as you do here because it's not, I mean, growing up, I was never accustomed to that, and I don't remember it really being an issue. And so I think, you know, we all sort of helped out in the household. My brother would vacuum, I would mop, my mom would do the washing, you know, so we all helped, which I'm not saying people don't help here in South Africa, but it's a lot more to do, and it's a big one for me if we were ever to move to Australia, because I know it would impact my overall stress level a lot. Wow, that was a long point. Third point, this is leading back to point number 1 of things being quite expensive. So to be able to go and do your hair on a regular basis, maybe go get massages, anything that kind of involves manual labor in Australia is really expensive. I found when we were there, I kind of just didn't do those things at all. Whereas in South Africa, I kind of am able to afford to put that into my budget a lot more than I can in Australia. Of course, it all comes down to what you earn and what your budget is. And so I guess it's quite relative. But for me, that was quite a big one because, you know, here we're quite accustomed, and I know I am super fortunate. Not everybody is able to do this, but, you know, able to every so often get nails done, do my hair, go get a massage, be able to sort of enjoy the luxuries of life. is a lot more expensive in Australia. It's not to say that people don't do it. Of course, it's done a lot, but it's pricey. Point number 4 is a little bit of a sensitive topic, and so I really hope that this doesn't offend anyone. But personally, I find, and I am Australian, so I feel like it's sort of okay for me to say this. However, I have changed a lot in the last 9 years. But Australians are quite sensitive. And what I mean by that is when having conversations with people, one is not always really direct with how things are said. I'm not saying we always beat around the bush, but things are sort of said in a more sensitive way. I mean, and when you have conversations there, you also need to be careful to be just like really politically correct about the way you say certain things. Whereas I find in South Africa, people have maybe a bit more of a tough skin and are a lot more straightforward. This was something that I think my family and friends and things struggled a lot with my husband, because he is very straightforward. It might just be him, I don't know. You let me know in the comments below if you have experienced this. But I do find in Australia, you do need to be a lot more careful with what you say and a little bit more sensitive with the way that you bring points across, which can be kind of difficult if you're moving from a country. I know like in, I think it's like Denmark or Sweden, is it? Where people are also like really direct. They'll just like tell you what they think. I know Germany is also quite similar to that, not necessarily in a horrible way, but you know, for instance, if I'm wearing a dress and I ask my husband, do you think this looks good on me? And he says like, no, I don't think that really looks that great. I think you should wear something else. Previously, on my Australian side of thinking, I would have probably been kind of offended and been like, oh, he doesn't think I'm pretty. Like maybe I look too fat, or maybe this, or of course I've grown a lot in the meantime. But now I've kind of gotten so used to that. I know that it's not a personal attack. And so I kind of just say, cool, thanks for being honest. Like I'll rather wear something that I know I feel comfortable in, that like looks really good. And so that's kind of what I mean by that point. Point number 5 is also a little bit more sensitive, and this kind of comes down to overall manners and respect of people in the country. And I don't know if this kind of comes down to language. You would have to let me know in the comments below if it is so in African languages. I'm not really aware of that. But I know in Afrikaans, it's very polite, or the way that you greet somebody who's either older than you and that you maybe don't know them. You would say tannie or if you speak to them. Did I say that right? I think so. Which is like saying auntie or uncle. The same goes with German. If you are going to speak to somebody who is older than you or somebody that you don't know, you would address them with sie instead of du. So it's like the polite version. You wouldn't say you to somebody. It's, I don't know, there's no translation in English, so I don't know how to explain that. Maybe it comes down to language, but I do feel like people in South Africa are really aware of being very polite, especially the children to older people. And I experienced this quite a lot using public transport. We didn't have a car while we were there for the 11 months that we were there. And so we used a lot of public transport. We used the tram and the bus system, which was really efficient. But I did find, and I was very pregnant there, so I went through my entire pregnancy there, and I found that oftentimes like people would be sitting or standing in the area that was designated for the elderly or the pregnant, and they would see you coming in and like not move and kind of just like look at you, put their headphones in and sort of continue on. And I found that like really strange, because I do feel that in South Africa, stuff like that just wouldn't happen. People are a lot more aware and polite and wanting to really respect those around them. And I'm not saying all Australians are like this. Please, I don't want to paint everybody under the same umbrella. Is that a saying? I think that's a saying. You know what I mean? Don't want to paint them all with the same brush. But we did come across people just being a little bit more disrespectful and rude. We had a situation where we went to the mall once, went to the movies, and you know, there were a group of young kids that kind of like would be just swearing and being loud on their skateboards and their scooters, and we witnessed them like push past this elderly woman, and you know, she was sort of taken aback, and my husband and I just looked at each other and were like, did that just happen? Oh my goodness. And I've never seen that in South Africa. It probably happens, I'm not sure. I don't know, it's an overall sense I get. Manners and just like being really polite in South Africa is a lot more, I think, regarded highly than it is in Australia. I could be wrong. You can let me know in the comments below. Please don't be offended by this. I really don't mean it to be in an offensive way. The next one is a pretty heavy point. I won't be able to say this out loud, and so I will type it up on the screen. But the abuse of this, I find, is like seen very often in Australia, like out and about when you're in the town. And I don't know if it's a bigger problem or if it's just a problem that is seen more. In South Africa, of course, we are driving a lot more than using public transport, at least where we are. There's no train systems or anything here where we live at the moment. There is the Gautrain, but that is not in this area. And so I just feel like you see it a lot more, and I feel personally like it's a problem. I know in teens it's a massive problem in Australia. It might be in South Africa, I'm not sure, but it is a big problem in Australia. So if you are going over with your teens or your kids, that is maybe also one just to kind of keep in mind. Point number 8 is religious beliefs. So Australia is a very diverse and multicultural country, which is fantastic. Everybody is welcome. There are so many religions practiced, experienced, out and about. And so going to school, you get to learn about lots of different people's religions, which is fantastic. But growing up or being now in South Africa, it is a lot more Christian based. I know a lot more of the population are actually Christian. Actually, let me quickly Google that and see what the percentage is. So it says, today the majority of South Africans identify as Christian, 84.2%. That's a really high percentage. Okay, this is editing me coming back in, and I totally forgot to search how much of the population in Australia are religious and what religions those are. I actually wanted to show you guys, and I'm also curious. As I'm editing this, I thought I might as well quickly do that. I don't know how reliable this is, but it let me know that the Roman Catholic, there are 22% Roman Catholic, other Christians 4.2%, Muslims 2.6%, Buddhist 2.4%, Orthodox 2.3%, Hindu 1.9%, and other 1.1%, and none are 30% of the population that are non-religious. And so I feel like this could be a pretty big point to influence one when moving over there. I grew up in Australia and I did not grow up in a Christian home. We believed a lot of different things, I think at different times. I'm not sure how I sort of experienced myself was knowing that there's a greater God, but sort of that he worked through different religions, which I don't believe now myself. You can check out this video if you'd like to. I don't know which slide it comes up on my Christian testimony after this video if you'd like to hear a little bit more about that. But I think if you are a Christian household moving from a very Christian-based country, going to Australia, it can sometimes feel really hard to fit in. We had a midwife there during my pregnancy who was South African, and she said in her workplace, she was the only one that was Christian, and she said it was quite hard to fit in. And I can really relate to that. We went to a church there and it was a really small church community, and we sort of asked around, and it was sort of the general consensus that that was just the size of churches, which would probably be a fifth or sixth of the size of the church that we attend here in South Africa. And so it can feel really hard to fit in, especially if you are going through a really tough time or somebody else is going through a really tough time. I kind of had to catch myself a couple times and not be like, you know, if you would like, I can really pray for you about this, because I do believe that there is so much power in prayer. However, you have to kind of catch yourself, because if you say it to somebody who's, you know, of a different religion, and I'm not saying everybody in South Africa is Christian, you do have to sort of find that out before you chat to somebody about stuff like this, because it can be a really sensitive topic. But in Australia, you know, people just look at you maybe like you're loony, or just be like kind of weirded out by it. And this is a big point for us. I know if we ever were to move to Australia in the future, I do think this would have a large impact on our life. Our children go to a very Christian-based school. They hear about it. They go to Sunday church, and it's something that's really ingrained kind of in everyday life, which is fantastic about South Africa, I find. For us who are Christian, if you're not Christian, I can understand that this point is not really relevant to you. Of course, it's fantastic that Australia is so diverse and multicultural, but yes, I do think it's something to consider. Point number 9 is family involvement. This is something that took me a long time to get used to when I came to South Africa. I just feel like South African families are really intertwined in each other's lives, whereas I feel like the nuclear family in Australia is really important and cherished, but you know, aunts, uncles, grandparents don't really have a major involvement in the life. It might not be that for everybody. It may just be the way we kind of experienced it in our household growing up, which is not necessarily a negative thing, but it might be something to get used to, where it's kind of just like everyone for themselves in a way. I don't know how to really explain this without it coming across as being rude, because I don't mean it to be in a rude way. I feel like it just is a fact for the way I've experienced it growing up there. It's just that I feel like Australian families aren't as involved in each other's lives, in each other's maybe drama or things that are going on as well. Could be personal experience, might not be right, I don't know, but you could take it into consideration if you want. Otherwise, just ignore this point. Now, this is point number 10. It's a pretty big one, so I'm not going to stay on it for too long. But Australia at the moment has like a no jab, no play, no work type of rule in place. And I know with the pandemic right now, there's a major issue in Australia with there sort of being like a double standard in society, where those who have gotten the jab are able to go to work, go to restaurants, go to cafes, and those who have not are not allowed to do so. The same goes for going to school. And if you are depending on the government for a subsidy, if you are depending on a subsidy for your children to go to daycare or to go to school, then you cannot do so if your children are not fully up to date on all of their inoculations, which for those families who maybe are anti-vax or don't, maybe don't get certain vaccinations because of whatever personal reasons, then they can't get a subsidy for that. And often a lot of daycares and schools will not take your children. And I think this is a major issue. I could hop on this for days, but let's not, because I feel like it could be a huge discussion and this video is already going to be really long. But I know with the whole pandemic at the moment, it's a major issue. And I feel like that could be a huge deal if you're thinking of moving to Australia at the moment. Point number 11 is that Australia has a lot of freedom, which is fantastic. However, I do find that teenagers and younger children have really got so much freedom that sometimes I feel like it can actually be a bit of a negative, especially in the teenage years. I myself had a lot of freedom. I started driving at 16, which I was really happy about and fantastic. I think I got a car at 17. My dad bought me my first car, which I'm so grateful for, but I had a lot of freedom. I could do whatever I wanted. Sometimes I was out later, and sometimes I got myself in some more sticky situations. And you can freely walk about a lot more. You can get public transport, and I just feel like sometimes parents aren't aware of what their kids are doing because of the freedom that they're given. And so I find it's a really fine line. Yes, it's a great thing, and it can also be a negative thing. I got myself in some sticky situations, which I feel like maybe being here, I wouldn't have. You can only really drive here at 18, and we were really dependent on my husband's family to drive us around and take us places, and they would pick us up from parties when we were like obviously teenagers and going out and doing things like that or whatever. And in Australia, you could get a taxi home, or you can get like, there'd be you'd call someone the designated driver or the sober bob if you were going out or whatnot. And I just feel like parents are not as involved. Some are, maybe, I don't know. It's not necessarily, I'm not trying to say my parents were not responsible or anything like that. I think it's just the overall, that's just what it's like there, at least from my experience. So sometimes I feel like teens and, turning into teens, those age children have just like a bit too much freedom. Point number 12 is also another sensitive one. And that is the fact that I personally feel like in Australia, people are like really privileged. Not everybody. There are, of course, people who still struggle, but I feel like things like going to school and getting a job are really taken for granted there. At least I took it for granted. There were days where I would try and skip school. I'd try and be sick. I didn't want to do certain things, and I didn't want to have a job at times, even though I earned money, of course. But I just feel like it's really taken for granted there. Whereas when I'm in a developing country now, I can see like how much of an impact school and education and having a great job really has on your life. There are people who are really struggling here, and you're seeing a lot more poverty in this country. Whereas in Australia, I just feel like things are taken for granted more. People whine more about things and moan more about things that just like aren't important. And I've kind of learned that a lot these last couple of years of just like, I need to be grateful for what I've been given and what I have in this life, because there are so many people who do not have that opportunity to even have a job or go to school or have certain things. And I just feel like even kids in Australia just like really privileged, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it also means that you're protected from a lot and maybe a little bit more, if I can use the word, spoiled. Not all, of course, but that was just my experience of that. Now, the last point is sort of a silly one, number 13. If you're not into snakes and spiders and big bugs, do not go to Australia, because there are a lot of spiders, a lot of big snakes, and they are everywhere. They will come into your house. Of course, South Africa is very similar. But if you're trying to move from a country like Germany or another European country, it can be quite a shock, because there are massive huntsman spiders. There are deadly spiders like the redback spider. There are really venomous snakes. And so sometimes it's a bit of a shock when you come across these creatures. You get used to them, I guess. You can kind of appreciate them from a distance, maybe. Every little animal has something to do in this ecosystem. I understand that. But there are a lot of creepy crawlies. So ending on that note, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that it was helpful. Please like and subscribe. Please leave us a comment below. It really helps me out with the algorithm. Let me know what it's like in the country you live in. If you are thinking of even moving to Australia, what that's like. Sorry for the change in angle quickly. My son just woke up as I was finishing the outro. I just wanted to say, if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and check out this other video I made on the reasons why Australia is a great place to live. I think you might enjoy it. Okay, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!